I remember the exact sound the house made the night everything changed. The kettle humming softly, the TV murmuring in the background, and my sister's laughter echoing from the kitchen. That laugh used to be my comfort, the sound of safety, of childhood, of someone who had seen every version of me and loved me anyway. I trusted her the way you trust your own reflection, never questioning it, never doubting it could turn against you. Aisha wasn't just my sister. She was my best friend, my secret keeper, the person I called when I was too tired to pretend everything was fine. We grew up sharing everything: clothes, dreams, heartbreaks. When I got married, she was the one who helped me choose my wedding dress, the one who stood beside me, teary-eyed, as I said my vows. And when I had my son, she was there again, holding him before even I did. So, when my world began to fall apart, it didn't come from an enemy or a stranger. It came from her, the one person I thought would protect my home, not burn it down from the inside. I never imagined love could twist itself into betrayal so silently. We weren't rich, we weren't special, just a small, ordinary family built on simple dreams. Our home was a modest two-bedroom house on a quiet street, always smelling faintly of cardamom tea and detergent. But it was ours, filled with laughter, noise, and the rhythm of a life that, at the time, felt enough. Aisha was 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, we were inseparable. We shared everything: our school lunches, our late-night fears, our dreams about one day traveling the world. After our parents passed away, the bond became something deeper. She wasn't just my sister anymore. She was my confidant, my only family, my shadow. I became her guardian, but truthfully, she was the one who saved me from breaking apart after the funeral. When I got married to Imran, she was thrilled. She loved him instantly, not in a way that raised alarms, just in that warm, sisterly way. Imran was kind, gentle, and patient, the kind of man who brought flowers home just because and made breakfast on Sundays. He would make Aisha laugh at dinner with his silly jokes, and I'd smile, grateful that my husband and sister got along so well. I thought, this is what peace feels like. When I had my son, Saad, life grew busier but sweeter. Nights were long, but mornings were soft and full of promise. Aisha practically lived with us during those months, rocking the baby to sleep, cooking meals, helping with laundry. She became a second mother to my child. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find her humming softly to him, her hair messy, eyes tired but full of tenderness. Watching them together filled me with love and comfort. It felt like the family I'd always wanted. We had our little traditions. Sunday was biryani day. Imran cooked, Aisha made raita, and I handled dessert. We'd sit on the floor together, laughing over the chaos of spilled rice and stories from old times. In the evenings, we'd watch dramas and tease each other about which actor was the most handsome. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good, solid, and familiar. I used to believe that's what real happiness was. Not fireworks, but quiet routine. Not grand moments, but the small, reliable ones. People often said they envied how close Aisha and I were. "You're lucky," my friends would tell me. "Not everyone gets a sister who's also a best friend." And I believed them. She was there through every storm, when I had postpartum depression, when Imran lost his job for a few months, when money was tight, and hope felt thinner than paper. She held me up, reminded me I wasn't alone. If someone had told me then that this same love, this same closeness, would one day destroy everything I held sacred, I would have laughed. Betrayal didn't belong in our story. We were a small, ordinary family, yes, but ordinary families, I would soon learn, can hold the most extraordinary heartbreaks. It didn't happen overnight. That's the worst part. There was no thunderclap moment, no dramatic reveal. It started quietly, like a crack in glass you don't notice until it spreads. Small things. Tiny, forgettable things that didn't feel little once I started seeing the pattern. Aisha began visiting more often than usual. At first, I thought it was sweet. She said she missed Saad, and who wouldn't? My son was the kind of child who made everyone fall in love with him. She'd come over after work, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with takeout, saying, "You must be tired, Baji. I thought I'd give you a break." And I'd smile, feeling grateful. But slowly, her visits stretched later into the night. Sometimes I'd go to bed, leaving her and Imran chatting in the living room, laughter spilling softly through the door. I told myself it was harmless. They were family. Then came the phone calls. I'd see Imran's phone light up with Aisha's name late in the evening. When I'd ask, he'd say, she just wanted advice about work. He always said it so casually, with no guilt in his tone, that I believed him. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. But soon, I began to notice how quickly he'd step outside to take those calls. He said it was because of the baby's noise. I didn't argue. Mothers learn to pick their battles. I started catching glances, those half-seconds where something unspoken passed between them. One night, while we were having dinner, Imran complimented Aisha's cooking, said she made biryani better than me. It was an innocent joke, but the way Aisha blushed and looked down made something uneasy stir inside me. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't want to be that kind of woman, jealous, suspicious, petty. The changes were subtle but constant. Aisha began dressing differently whenever she visited, more carefully, like she was preparing for someone's eyes to notice. She wore perfume, light and floral, the kind Imran had once gifted me on my birthday. Sometimes I caught him watching her a little too long and then pretending not to. My stomach would twist, but I'd silence the thought with guilt. Don't think like that, I'd tell myself. She's your sister. He's your husband. They love you. Even their laughter changed. It wasn't the carefree, sibling-like laughter from before. It was softer now, slower, like they shared an inside joke I wasn't part of. When I'd walk into the room, conversations would stop mid-sentence. We were just talking about something silly, Aisha would say quickly, eyes darting away. Those silences said more than words ever could. The shift wasn't in what they did. It was in how they did it. The small hesitations, the lowered eyes, the sudden stillness when I entered the room. And yet, I kept convincing myself it was nothing. Because acknowledging it meant admitting that something sacred, my trust, my family, might already be breaking. Looking back now, I think a part of me already knew. I could feel it in the heaviness that hung around our dinners, in the way Imran's voice softened when he spoke to her, in the way Aisha avoided my gaze when saying goodbye. But I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to stay blind, because the truth, once seen, could never be unseen. It's strange how love can make you protect the very things that are hurting you. I chose denial because it felt safer than facing the possibility that my own sister, my own blood, might be quietly falling in love with my husband. The signs were there, whispering, growing louder each day, but I refused to listen. Until one night I no longer had a choice. It was an ordinary evening, one of those dull, peaceful nights when life feels steady and predictable. Imran was in the shower, Aisha had left after dinner, and Saad was finally asleep. The house was quiet, humming softly under the ceiling fan. I remember thinking how rare those calm moments were, how comforting the silence felt. I had no idea that, within minutes, that silence would turn into something I'd never forget. I was packing Saad's school bag for the next day when I realized my phone charger was missing. I remembered lending it to Aisha earlier in the day. She'd left her handbag on the hall table, so I reached in casually to check if she had put it there. It wasn't there, but something else was. A folded piece of paper. Normally, I would have ignored it, but my name was scribbled faintly on the corner, almost like an afterthought. Curiosity made me open it. My fingers trembled even before I read the words, as if my body sensed what my mind didn't. The note was short, just a few sentences, but it felt like a knife. I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong. I've tried to fight it, but I can't anymore. Please don't tell her yet. I need time to fix this. No name.
No signature.
But I knew. I knew who had written it. Aisha's handwriting was unmistakable. She used to write me notes just like that when we were younger, little folded hearts of affection and apology. The loop of her letters, the tilt of her words. It was her. And I knew who it was for. Please don't tell her yet. The her was me. My knees buckled, and I sat down on the floor, the letter shaking in my hands. My heartbeat was so loud it drowned out the world. I read it again and again, hoping I was misreading, misunderstanding, that maybe it was meant for someone else. But every word felt like a mirror shattering. Imran came out of the bathroom humming softly, towel around his shoulders, completely unaware that the world had shifted under my feet. I shoved the letter into my pocket before he saw it. For the first time in our marriage, I looked at him and felt like I didn't know the man standing in front of me. His smile, his casual way of asking, "You okay?" All of it felt foreign. How long had he been lying to me? How long had I been sleeping beside someone who shared his heart with another woman, my sister? That night, I barely slept. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the note on the table, watching the clock hands crawl past midnight. My mind was a storm, memories twisting, questions multiplying. Every laugh between them, every shared glance, every late-night work call, now replayed in my head with cruel clarity. At 2 a.m., I went to Aisha's room. She was staying with us that week, but stopped outside her door. I could hear her soft breathing, peaceful and unaware. I wanted to wake her, scream, demand the truth. But I couldn't. My throat closed up, my body refused to move. Because confronting her meant making it real. And I wasn't ready for that. I sat outside her door until dawn, clutching that letter like it was both evidence and poison. The first rays of morning light crept across the floor, and I realized something terrifying. The life I thought I had, the people I trusted most, were no longer mine. When the sun rose, I tucked the letter into my dresser drawer, shut it carefully, and wiped my tears. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered, "Not yet." Because sometimes, when betrayal shows its teeth, your first instinct isn't to fight, it's to freeze. It took me 3 whole days to gather the courage. 3 long, silent days where every sound in the house felt heavy with secrets. I moved like a stranger among my own family, cooking, cleaning, smiling when I had to. But inside, everything was trembling. I watched Aisha closely, quietly, as if studying a stranger wearing my sister's face. Every laugh, every glance toward Imran felt loaded, and I could barely breathe around them both. On the 4th day, when Saad had gone to school and Imran had left for work, I asked her to sit with me. She came into the living room, barefoot, her hair tied in a loose bun, a soft shawl around her shoulders. She looked so young in that moment, fragile, innocent, that for a heartbeat, I almost forgot why I had called her. But then I remembered the letter, folded neatly in my dresser drawer like a wound that refused to close. "Aisha," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. "I want to ask you something, and I want the truth." She frowned, confused. "Of course, Baji. What is it?" I placed the letter on the table between us. Her eyes flicked toward it, and in that single second, everything changed. Her face drained of color, her lips parted, and the silence stretched like an open wound. She didn't even try to pretend she didn't recognize it. Her hands began to shake as she reached for it, but I stopped her. "Don't," I said, my voice trembling. "Just tell me. Is it true?" Tears filled her eyes instantly. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, like a child caught in a lie too big to explain. "Baji, I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered finally, her voice barely a breath. Those words pierced deeper than any confession could have. Didn't mean for it to happen. As if love or betrayal was something that simply happened to her, like rain or fate. I felt my chest tighten painfully. "How long?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. She stared at her hands. "A few months. It started after he helped me with some things. We were just talking at first. I was lonely, Baji. You know how hard things have been. I didn't realize when it changed." I laughed then, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. My sister, my own blood, sitting in front of me, confessing she had feelings for the man I shared a life with. "You didn't realize?" I said bitterly. "Aisha, you looked me in the eye every single day. You held my son. You ate dinner at my table. She began to sob, covering her face.
I'm sorry.
I tried to stop it. I swear I tried. He didn't do anything wrong. It's me. It's all my fault. Her words hit me like a storm. She was defending him, protecting him, and that, somehow, hurt more than the betrayal itself. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand why she couldn't have talked to me before everything fell apart. But the sight of her, broken, guilty, small, stopped me. She looked like the little girl I'd once held after nightmares, the one who'd clung to me when our parents died. So instead, I whispered, "Why him, Aisha? Of all the men in the world, why my husband?" She didn't answer. She just cried, whispering my name over and over, like an apology that couldn't undo what had been done. I sat there for a long time, watching her crumble, feeling both anger and pity twist inside me. I wanted to hate her, truly I did, but I couldn't. I hated the situation, the weakness, the choices that led us here. By the time she left the room, I felt hollow. No screaming, no drama, just silence. The kind of silence that fills a house when something sacred has been broken. And as the door closed behind her, one truth settled in my chest like lead. Love may forgive many things, but trust, once shattered, doesn't rebuild overnight. It becomes a ghost that lives between you, whispering reminders of what used to be whole. After that day, everything inside the house changed, not in ways you could point at, but in the air itself. The silence had a weight now. Every sound, every word, every glance between us carried invisible shards of something broken. I moved through my days carefully, like walking barefoot over glass, afraid that the next step might cut too deep. Aisha stayed away for a few days after our confrontation. She sent a few messages, long ones, full of apologies I couldn't bring myself to read. I saw her name flash on my phone and felt nausea rise in my throat. I couldn't face her voice. Every memory we had together, childhood secrets, laughter, comfort, had turned bitter. I wanted to delete her messages, but I couldn't. Deleting them felt like deleting the sister I once knew. Imran, on the other hand, noticed something was wrong but didn't know what. Or maybe he did. Maybe he was just waiting for me to speak first. He moved around me carefully, like a man walking in the dark, afraid of bumping into something sharp. His smiles became forced, his touches hesitant. Every time he said, "I love you," it sounded like a question. At night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way Aisha had cried when she confessed. Her words echoed in my head. I didn't mean for it to happen. I kept wondering, what had happened exactly? How far had it gone? Was it just emotions or something more? My mind wouldn't stop torturing me with pictures I didn't want to see. I started noticing things I had missed before, little inconsistencies that now screamed truth. The perfume on Imran's shirt that wasn't mine. The way he flinched when I mentioned Aisha's name. The sudden change in his phone password. Every small thing became evidence, and every piece of evidence tore me a little more. I didn't confront him yet. I wasn't ready to hear what I already knew. Meals became rituals of pretending. I'd serve dinner, smile faintly, and ask how his day was. He'd answer, avoiding my eyes. Between us sat a silence, so thick it could choke. Even Saad noticed it once. "Mama, why don't you laugh anymore?" he asked one evening, his small face full of confusion. I forced a smile and said I was just tired. Tired, the easiest lie to hide a heartbreak. At times, I'd find myself scrolling through old photos. Pictures of Aisha holding my baby, of us on family trips, of her helping me choose my wedding dress. The smiles looked so genuine, so innocent. I'd stare at those faces and whisper, "What changed? When did you start looking at him differently?" There were moments I wanted to confront Imran, to scream, to make him confess. But then I'd see Saada's sleepy face, his small hands clutching his teddy bear, and I'd stop. I couldn't shatter his world the way mine had been shattered. So I carried it quietly. I cooked, cleaned, worked, and functioned like a woman who hadn't just discovered betrayal under her own roof. But inside, I was unraveling bit by bit, day by day. Each morning felt like dragging myself through shards of what used to be my life. Every night ended in tears I couldn't explain. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation, confusion, and grief tangled together. Because betrayal doesn't just break your heart, it breaks your reflection, too. You start doubting your own worth, your own instincts. You start wondering if you were ever truly loved, or if everything was just a beautiful illusion. And so I stayed quiet, bleeding on the inside, waiting for a sign, something, anything, that would tell me what to do next. But sometimes, the cruelest part of pain isn't not knowing the truth, it's knowing it and still pretending you don't. There comes a moment in every betrayal when you realize that anger alone cannot fix anything. That moment arrived for me slowly, painfully, like dawn breaking through a storm. After days of walking on shards, listening to conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, and replaying every look and laugh between Imran and Aisha, I understood something crucial. I could not control them. I could not stop her feelings. I could not erase what had already happened. I could not force Imran to feel guilt in the way I did. That truth was heavy, suffocating, but it was also freeing in a strange way. What I could control, however, was myself. I could control my response, my choices, and the boundaries I set around my own life. I realized that clinging to anger and playing detective in my own home would only destroy me from the inside. I had a son to care for, a life that couldn't just stop because two people I loved had faltered. My pain was valid, but letting it dominate my actions would only prolong the wound. The first step was honesty, brutal, undeniable honesty. I called Imran to sit with me, my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. I told him what I had found, what I had read, what I knew. I didn't accuse. I didn't scream. I simply stated the truth, that I had discovered the note, that I knew feelings had crossed lines, and that this had changed the way I saw him. He was quiet. That quiet was worse than anger. It was heavy, full of guilt and shame. He admitted his part, not grand gestures of confession, but small, human admissions of weakness. He promised repeatedly that it would never happen again, that he wanted to repair what had been broken. Listening to him, I realized something. Humans are fallible. Love doesn't make us immune to mistakes, but it can demand accountability. I didn't confront Aisha yet. I needed clarity, not chaos. I had to decide what my boundaries were before I could face her. I decided she couldn't stay in our home in the same way. Her presence needed to be limited until I felt my trust wasn't constantly under assault. It was a bitter choice, but necessary. Protecting my own emotional space became the priority. Then came the hardest realization. Forgiveness is not a moment. It's a process. Choosing to forgive doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means reclaiming control over your life, refusing to let anger dictate every decision. I couldn't erase the betrayal, but I could refuse to let it define my entire existence. I could continue to love, cautiously, while building walls that felt safe for me. So, I chose myself first, my peace, my sanity, my son, and the life I wanted to preserve. I could control my actions, my boundaries, my decisions. I couldn't control their hearts, their mistakes, or the pain they had caused. And in that balance between what I could shape and what I could not, I found the first glimmer of strength. Sometimes, the hardest battles aren't fought with words or fists. They're fought quietly, within yourself, with the courage to stand firm when everything familiar has crumbled. And that was exactly the battle I chose to fight. After I made my choice, the choice to protect myself, my marriage, and my son, life didn't suddenly become easy. There was no dramatic confrontation, no vindictive speech. The reckoning came quietly, through small but deliberate actions that carried consequences far bigger than they seemed at first. It was subtle, surgical, and deeply personal, a way to reclaim control without collapsing the fragile remnants of my family. The first step was creating distance. I asked Aisha to move out temporarily, to find her own space, to live in a home where her presence wouldn't be a constant reminder of the fracture she had caused. She didn't argue. She simply cried, clinging to the remnants of our shared past, begging me not to abandon her. But I had to be firm. This wasn't about punishment for the sake of revenge. It was about survival. I needed to breathe without the shadow of her feelings lingering in every room. Imran, too, faced consequences, not dramatic or public, but consistent and firm. I established boundaries. No late-night calls with Aisha, no unnecessary closeness, complete transparency about where he was and what he was doing. Every small action he took now had meaning, a way for him to prove, in increments, that he could be trusted again. And he tried, sometimes clumsily, sometimes awkwardly, but he tried. And I had to watch, day after day, as he learned that love alone isn't enough. Trust is built slowly, brick by brick. I also implemented small, personal punishments for myself, though they felt more like lessons than revenge. I stopped assuming that everyone I loved had pure intentions. I measured my trust carefully, observing and listening, never ignoring gut instincts. I reminded myself that self-preservation was not selfish, it was necessary. I also documented everything, feelings, moments, instances that made me uneasy. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation, a way to protect myself emotionally and mentally. The consequences of these actions were larger than I expected. Aisha's absence reshaped the house. Meals felt emptier, but the air was lighter, free of unspoken tension. Imran's awareness and caution, while necessary, highlighted how fragile our relationship had become. Every misstep, every glance, every word now carried weight. It was exhausting but necessary, a slow, deliberate healing process. And the most profound consequence of all was the shift within myself. I became sharper, more vigilant, and surprisingly stronger. I learned to sit with discomfort, to hold grief and anger without letting them consume me. I realized that the reckoning was not only theirs, it was mine too, a confrontation with my own expectations, my own naivete, my own willingness to overlook subtle warning signs. I also discovered that small punishments can teach big lessons. Distance, boundaries, accountability. They were tools that reshaped behavior without destroying lives entirely. I didn't seek to humiliate or hurt. I sought equilibrium. And in this careful, deliberate process, I began to reclaim my life piece by piece, even if the wounds remained visible. The house became a place of cautious coexistence rather than unspoken tension. The reckoning, while painful, was a necessary turning point, the moment when I stopped being a passive victim and began actively shaping the life I wanted, regardless of what my sister or husband had done. And though the scars remained, they were no longer a mark of helplessness. They were proof of endurance, strength, and the uncompromising act of choosing myself first. Life after betrayal doesn't come with a neat reset button. It doesn't suddenly fix itself, and it certainly doesn't erase the wounds that cut deep into your heart. After the confrontation, after the distance and boundaries were set, I realized that the hardest part wasn't punishment or anger, it was compromise. It was learning to live in a world where the people I loved most had hurt me, and accepting that some truths would never fully disappear. The first compromise was with Aisha. I allowed her back into our lives, but carefully, slowly, and on my terms. She had moved into a small apartment across town, and visits were limited and structured. No late nights alone in the house, no private conversations with Imran, and no blurred lines between sisterly affection and something more. It was a fragile truce, and every day felt like walking on tightrope. One misstep could unravel it all. I had to accept that she was still part of my life, but her role had changed. She was no longer the seamless part of my world she once was. She was someone I had to monitor carefully, someone whose love and loyalty I could no longer take for granted. With Imran, the compromise was different. It was about learning to separate love from trust, affection from betrayal. I couldn't erase the memory of what had happened, and I couldn't pretend that my confidence in him was absolute. But I could choose to see the remorse, the effort, and the willingness to repair what was broken. We set boundaries, communicated openly, and agreed to therapy, not because we were weak, but because we were committed to rebuilding. Every step required patience. Every interaction demanded honesty. Compromise became the glue that held us together. I also had to compromise with myself. I had to accept that my life would never be as simple as it once was. The innocence of my trust was gone. I could no longer believe in unconditional loyalty without question. But I could choose to live without constant fear, without letting betrayal define my every thought. I decided that survival meant balance, acknowledging the pain while refusing to be imprisoned by it. I refused to let anger and suspicion dictate my relationship with my son, my husband, or even my sister. The new truth was a living, breathing reality. Love and betrayal can coexist in the same space. People are flawed, hearts are messy, and families are imperfect. Acceptance didn't mean forgiveness in the traditional sense. It meant recognizing that life goes on despite the cracks. It meant finding small joys amidst the lingering pain. Saada's laughter, quiet Sundays with Imran, even the rare moment of genuine warmth from Aisha that reminded me of the sister I once knew. Over time, compromise became a practice, not a one-time act. I learned to let go of the illusion of a perfect family, replacing it with a realistic one that required effort, vigilance, and care. Living with this truth was hard, but it was also empowering. I discovered that I could set boundaries without shutting my heart completely, that I could protect myself while still loving, and that I could rebuild life, not as it was, but as it could be, imperfect, cautious, and still worth holding on to. And so, every day, I chose compromise. Not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to survive, to heal, and to create a life that, despite everything, was still mine. Rebuilding after betrayal isn't sudden. There's no single moment when everything falls back into place. Instead, it's quiet, incremental, and painstaking. I had to learn that the hardest work was not in punishing others or demanding apologies, but in reclaiming myself, my sense of worth, and my ability to trust, cautiously, slowly, one small step at a time. The first step was reclaiming my own space. I started spending more time on routines that belonged to me alone, morning walks, reading, journaling, even small household tasks that once felt mundane. Each act was a tiny assertion. This is my life, my choices, my peace. I refused to let anger or hurt dictate my identity. My home was no longer just a stage for others' mistakes. It was a sanctuary I had to restore, brick by brick. With Imran, the work was deliberate and conscious. We attended counseling sessions, not to replay the betrayal endlessly, but to develop tools, communication, boundaries, honesty, to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. I learned to voice discomfort immediately instead of letting it fester. I learned to notice his effort, not just the mistakes that haunted me. Trust, I realized, wasn't given once. It was earned every day, in small gestures, consistent choices, and silent accountability. Rebuilding trust with Aisha was a separate, delicate task. I monitored our interactions carefully, setting clear limits while allowing her a chance to demonstrate change. She had to learn to respect boundaries she had once ignored, and I had to learn to see her as a flawed human rather than a villain. There were days when the memory of her betrayal felt fresh, stabbing at me, and I had to remind myself that forgiving, even partially, didn't mean erasing the pain. It meant protecting my own heart while navigating hers. I also learned to protect my relationship with Saad. I refused to let the betrayal taint my love for him or the stability I promised to provide. I made him the anchor in my life, the reason I could not collapse inward, the reason I had to keep walking, even when the floors of my mind felt jagged and unsafe. His laughter, his curiosity, his innocence became my medicine, reminding me of why the quiet work mattered. Slowly, I noticed changes. The house felt lighter. Conversations became easier. Laughter returned, small but genuine, not forced. I began to trust my instincts again, the ones I had doubted during the days of paranoia and fear. And most importantly, I began to trust myself. I realized that my heart, though bruised, was capable of resilience. It could protect, love, and rebuild, even when life had been cruel. Rebuilding wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending the betrayal hadn't happened. It was about quietly, deliberately creating a new version of my life, one in which I could coexist with the past without being consumed by it. Every day I chose patience, boundaries, and self-care, and with each choice, I felt stronger, clearer, and more in control of my own story. The quiet work is ongoing. Trust may never be the same, but I have learned that sometimes the strongest foundations are built not in the absence of cracks, but in the careful, mindful repair of them. And in doing so, I rebuilt not just my relationships, but myself. A year had passed since that night, the night I discovered the note, the night I realized that my world had shifted forever. The house felt quieter now, more controlled, more deliberate, but it carried a different energy. Something had been lost, something precious and irreplaceable, and yet something else had survived, stubborn and resilient. The aftermath was not dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, and profoundly transformative. What remained was my family, though it had changed. Imran and I were together, rebuilding our marriage carefully, brick by brick. We laughed again, though the laughter was more cautious, sometimes hesitant. We learned to speak openly about feelings, to recognize the small gestures that rebuild trust. Counseling had taught us tools, but more than that, it reminded us why we had chosen each other in the first place. Love alone hadn't been enough to prevent betrayal, but it became a reason to fight, to hold on, to try again. Aisha remained in our lives too, but differently. She was no longer the seamless, ever-present sister I had relied on without question. She lived separately, worked independently, and visited only with transparency and caution. The warmth between us had returned in small doses, a gentle conversation here, a shared cup of tea there, but the familiarity was gone. She had made choices that could not be undone, and I had to reconcile her presence with the memory of the betrayal. We could coexist, even care for each other, but the innocence of our past could not be restored. What was lost, however, was not small. The trust one had taken for granted, the naive certainty in my relationships, the sense that my family was impenetrable, all of that had vanished. I could no longer assume loyalty. Every gesture, every word had to be observed and measured. The sense of safety I had once felt in my home, in my marriage, in my sister's love, had been replaced by vigilance. I had to protect my heart in ways I had never imagined. The betrayal had left a scar, permanent and raw, reminding me that love and pain often coexist. Yet in the midst of loss, there was growth. I had learned to value myself in ways I never had before. I could set boundaries without guilt, demand respect without fear, and navigate relationships without losing sight of my own worth. I had learned that survival isn't about erasing pain but living despite it, that forgiveness is not always for others, but for one's own freedom. Saad remained my anchor, the unbroken thread of joy and innocence that reminded me of what was worth holding on to. His laughter, curiosity, and unconditional love became a daily medicine, a reason to keep building life even when the past haunted me. The aftermath, I realized, was not about victory or defeat. It was about balance, a delicate equilibrium between what remained and what was lost. Life had taken some things from me, but it had left others intact, and I had to choose what to nurture, what to protect, and what to let go. In that quiet reckoning, I understood that though betrayal could fracture the heart, it could also forge resilience. And sometimes, the strongest families are those who survive the cracks, who continue to care, to love, and to live, imperfect, cautious, and wiser than before. If this story touched you, leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories of love, betrayal, and strength.